All right. Welcome everybody to another EBFA webinar. It's been a couple months, so I'm excited to be back into the pattern of doing our monthly webinar series. To those who are tuning in live, very special welcome to you. Thank you for taking time out of your busy schedule, whether it's morning or evening where you are. Very special thank you from me and everyone at EBFA. If you are new to the EBFA webinars, a very special welcome to you. And if you are listening to this on a recording, welcome as well. My name is Dr. Emily Splickle. I am a podiatrist, human movement specialist, and the founder of the Evidence-Based Fitness Academy. And I am dedicating my medical podiatry degree career into changing the way that health and fitness professionals look at movement from the ground up, integrating foot-specific training, what we call foot-to-core sequencing, and barefoot science. So the way that this is going to go down is I'm going to do roughly 30 to 40 minutes of a lecture so that you guys get some good content, and then we will go through questions. So there is a questions tab on the right side of your control panel. We will type those in and go over those at the end. So if you can stick around through those questions, that would be wonderful. If you cannot, know that this is going to be recorded, or it is being recorded, and then we archive all of our webinars on the EBFA YouTube channel, which is youtube.com/EBFA Fitness. We have probably over 40 free educational webinars on there based on foot and ankle barefoot science, human movement, and we have guest educators as well. So we are going to kick it off. We are speaking tonight about the science of the human lever. We're going to be looking specifically at the internal fascial architecture of the human foot. And I thought that this would be a great webinar. A lot of articles and workshops focus when it comes to foot and ankle function. A lot of it is really placed on the rear foot. So a lot of people are speaking about ankle dorsiflexion, ankle mobility, subtalar joint position, inversion, eversion, pronation, supination. But we also want to make sure that we're understanding the important role that optimal forefoot function plays in human movement and in human performance rehab, etc. So we're going to be taking a shift to the forefoot and looking at the human lever and taking a closer look at the anatomy, because the anatomy is very important and it helps you understand really how deeply integrated the foot is. I think it also adds a layer of complexity, which if you already think the foot is complex, this will just make it even more complex. And we will end it by speaking a little bit about bunions. Definitely have to talk about neuromas if we're going to be speaking about the forefoot, and then hammer toes as well, of course. So we are getting started. Again, I had mentioned my name, Dr. Emily Splickle, bio to the left, website, if you're not familiar with our website, ebfafitness.com. Please do check that out. So we're going to be looking at the foot and human movement. So when I do my workshops, I speak about 3 primary functions of the foot. And the functions of the foot relate directly to human locomotion or bipedalism, knowing that what differentiates the human foot from the primate foot is that we're bipedal. So that's the biggest evolution. I did a webinar I don't know, probably 6 months ago now, where I spoke about the evolution of the human foot. If you have not heard that one, I highly encourage you to check it out. It's actually changed the way that I look at my patients and some of their pathology, and seeing how our human plantar-grade foot has evolved, and based off of that is the evolution of walking or bipedalism. So the 3 main functions of the human foot, and again, this is not limited to this, but I try to keep it to these 3 key topics. So when it comes to training the foot, rehabbing the foot, and the exercises that you might choose for your clients, athletes, or patients, you want to think of these 3 functions when you're doing that. First one, single leg balance, of course. Human locomotion, the most functional position of a gait cycle is a single leg position. So you must be able to maintain single leg balance. Single leg balancing is one of the best ways to actually strengthen your subtalar joint and the muscles that stabilize the subtalar joint. So if you're looking a little bit specifically at some of our fascial lines, single leg training is going to be one of the key ways to optimize your spiral line, because your spiral line is really coming from the plantar into the medial lateral aspect and controlling both sides of that subtalar joint. Of course, the first ray as well. Second function of the foot and human movement is going to be the damping of impact forces. This is not the focus of this lecture or this webinar. However, we do know that impact forces are perceived by the body as vibrations. The way that your body damps the vibrations is by creating fascial tension. So we will be speaking about that throughout this webinar, is the degree of tension or stiffness that you can create in the foot is key to optimal damping of impact forces. So when you're thinking about the timing and the repetitive damping of impact forces, let's say in a gait cycle, if we're taking 10,000 steps a day, you must be very efficient at the ability to stiffen and relax the foot. It's like a dance back and forth between fascial tension and fascial relaxation, myofascial relaxation. And then the third function of the foot is propulsion, or the ability to create a rigid lever, which means, again, thinking about the gait cycle and walking. The goal of walking is to get from point A to point B. We were designed to move, which means that not only do we need to be able to balance, but we need to be able to progress forward. Movement, progression, one foot in front of the other, that is the goal of the foot. And that's really what we're going to be focusing on today. So focusing on the human lever, the rigid lever of the foot. There are a few key features when it comes to the ability to get into a lever position. So if we can see the right foot of this dancer, this beautiful position, I don't know if you think it's beautiful. I think it's absolutely beautiful. And what we see is that there is an inverted, anytime you dorsiflex the first MPJ and you get into this lever position, you should have a very tightly locked, supinated, inverted subtalar joint. That's what creates the rigidity of this lever position from a rear foot perspective. As you get into this inverted subtalar joint position, you are elevating the arch. We're going to speak about this in a moment, but this is called your windlass mechanism. So the ability to dorsiflex the first MPJ and invert the subtalar joint, you're essentially tensioning the plantar fascia, which elevates the navicular and the arch. That is called the windlass mechanism. We have a stable lever point. So you are flexing over all of your MPJs. That is going to be your lever point. They must be stable. So when we look at some of the intrinsic muscles of the foot, the function of those intrinsic muscles of the foot is to stabilize the MPJs. This is when you're looking specifically at the interossei and the lumbricals. Those ones are going to play a key role in stabilizing the MPJs. Obviously, there's dorsiflexion as well. We spoke about that. Something key that we're going to be speaking about today as well is what's called a forefoot splay. Now, optimal lever function requires you to have forefoot splay. So if you are an advocate of minimal shoes that'll have a wide toe box, think Vivo Barefoot, Vibrams, something that's going to allow your forefoot to splay, you are optimizing your human lever. Let's say you're going to a shoe that's very rigid, maybe like some of the dress shoes like an Oxford, or some of the loafers that women might wear, thinking like office shoes. A lot of those actually restrict the optimal forefoot splay, which we're going to see actually has this huge cascade of disruption in foot function. And then the final thing that we're going to be looking at is fascial stiffness. So in this position here, you're thinking rigid lever, yes, from a biomechanical perspective, but I want you to always think of the foot in this position is also fascially stiff, and that is key. Any of the education that I do, I speak about biomechanics and neuromuscular control. Neuromuscular control is going to refer more to that fascial coordination or stiffening response. So again, in this position, this is just a different perspective. We are supinated, locked, stable, lever for power. We're going to take a closer look at this position. We're going to be focusing, for the sake of this webinar, on the soft tissue, fascial, neuromuscular coordination side of things versus the biomechanical. Okay, but please know that we do want to respect both sides. So we're going to be taking a deep fascial look at the human foot, specifically the forefoot. And the fascial integration of the human foot is linked to the plantar aponeurosis or the plantar fascia. Your plantar fascia is connected to every deep layer of the human foot. When it comes to optimizing the human lever, you must be able to optimize your plantar fascia. This is going to go much more in detail than simply how your Achilles tendon blends into your plantar fascia and becomes the posterior chain. It extends much, much deeper and much more complex in the forefoot. But appreciating that optimal forefoot function is actually plantar fascial function, and plantar fascial function is actually Achilles tendon function. You can see where this is going to go from an integrated perspective. So when we look at the plantar aponeurosis or the plantar fascia, we can appreciate it from a plantar aspect here. There's a few key features that we want to think about. We have your plantar fascia originates on the plantar calcaneal tubercle, the medial plantar calcaneal tubercle. So if anyone who is listening has ever had plantar fasciitis, where that classic plantar fascial pain is the plantar medial calcaneal tubercle. So why you have that is really where your center of Achilles tendon tension goes. So the blending of the Achilles tendon into the plantar fascia really is centered around the medial plantar calcaneal tubercle. That's why classic plantar fascial pain is right at that insertion. That doesn't mean that if you have pain in your mid fascia, that's not plantar fasciitis. It's just a little bit different presentation. Your plantar fascia is also divided into 3 bands. You have a medial, central, and lateral band. The band that has the greatest amount of tension and the band that actually has the strongest influence in the windlass mechanism is the medial band. And the medial band we'll see is the one that actually blends into your first ray and the sesamoids and controls that medial aspect of the foot. So that would be the one clearly that's going to influence the medial longitudinal arch. I'm not talking a lot on plantar fasciitis and plantar fasciosis. I'm actually going to be doing a webinar with web exercise in January where I'm focusing entirely on that. However, most partial tears of the plantar fascia actually happen in your central band. So just keep that as like a side factoid. A lot of fibromas that I see in my patients are also central band fibromas. As we can see that your plantar fascia, as it goes distally into the digits, it divides into 5 slips. It inserts into each digit, and we're going to look heavily at that. Distally, in addition, your plantar fascia divides into superficial layers and deep layers. You actually have 5 superficial tracts of your plantar fascia and 9 deep superficial tracts of your plantar fascia. Again, if that's starting to get a little complex, part of the point of these webinars is to show how complex the foot is. So, all right, so we're taking a closer look. I'm just going to go back here real quick. So what we're doing is we're coming from here. If you can see my arrow, we're starting here. This is the medial plantar calcaneal tubercle, Achilles tendon here. We're coming this way and we're seeing how the plantar fascia divides into 5 slips that it's going to insert into each digit. Your plantar fascia dividing into these 5 slips becomes what's called your plantar plate. Now, this is a plantar plate extending. This is it from another view here. Your plantar plate is coming here, and it is inserting onto the base of your toe, or the base of the proximal phalanx. The plantar plate is the primary stabilizing structure of your MPJs. Remember, in your human lever, in your push-off position, you need to have stable MPJs, which means that you must have proper plantar fascia, plantar aponeurosis balance or tension to have an optimal MPJ lever. So they're going to blend into the base of the proximal phalanx every digit. This here on the bottom, what this is showing is this really is your extensor sheath. It's showing how complex the balance of these small connective tissue fascial structures are around the MPJs. We're going to be speaking in a moment about the deep transverse ligament. But again, for now, I want you to think about the plantar plate is an extension of your plantar fascia, whose purpose is to stabilize your MPJs. It is the primary stabilizer of your MPJ. The way that it stabilizes your MPJs is that it pulls your toes down into the ground. Your plantar plate pulls the toes, it roots your toes or drives them down into the ground when you push off. So you could say that you've often thought of this as a toe flexor function. However, it is actually a plantar fascia into the plantar plate function. So when you see someone, let's say you have a client and you're looking at them and you see them like this person who has this second digit, they've lost purchase of the second MPJ or the second digit. The only way that you can lose purchase or contact of the ground here is by compromising your plantar plate. So if you've ever heard of plantar plate tears, that's actually a plantar fascia injury, if you want to get specific with it. And that's honestly the only way. So I don't even have to do an MRI really in this patient. I know that they have a compromised plantar plate. And then what happens in this position is that the phalanx goes up and the metatarsal is going to drive down. I will be speaking about this a little bit more when we talk to the end about different pathology and hammer toes. But knowing that the purpose of the plantar plate is to pull your toes down into the ground. So we actually have what is called a windlass mechanism, and you actually have a reverse windlass mechanism. Both of these are functions of your plantar fascia. Now, the classic windlass mechanism that a lot of people associate with the plantar fascia is dorsiflexion of the big toe, tightens plantar fascia, lifts the arch, and inverts the subtalar joint. So if you were in a push-off position just like this is essentially activating the windlass mechanism. The reverse windlass mechanism is when we are standing and we're weight bearing on the ground, you still put your body weight, puts tension on your plantar fascia when you're standing on your foot, and what it does is it pulls from here into the plantar plate and it pulls the digits into the ground. And that's a huge part of how you maintain balance. So you could actually say that in this position, what's happening is you have a windlass and a reverse windlass mechanism happening simultaneously. When we stand and we're balancing in a single leg position, you are activating your windlass mechanism. So this can help you answer, or if you've ever had the question of why do some of your patients or clients who have a history of plantar fasciitis and maybe a high arch foot, when they start doing short foot, they're essentially tightening or activating their reverse windlass mechanism, and they can actually feel it in their plantar fascia, right? So that's why they're starting to feel it, is driving the toes into the ground just like we do when we do short foot, stimulates the plantar fascia, And if they don't have a lot of elasticity in their fascia, they're at their end stretch, let's say, and then you put even more stretch on it or tension because you did short foot or the reverse windlass, they're going to start to feel symptoms. So in that client or in that patient, myofascial elasticity, myofascial release would be key before you start doing short foot. That's also why just standing in one place or prolonged standing gives patients plantar fasciitis. That's why, because of the reverse windlass mechanism. Okay, so we have, if we go a little bit further here, so there's a plantar plate under here. I had told you that we were going to speak about the deep transverse metatarsal ligament. This actually blends with your plantar plate. So if we were in this picture here, how we have this is your plantar plate, plantar aponeurosis, plantar plate, inserts here, pulls digit down. Now coming out of here from the side is going to be your deep transverse metatarsal ligament. This is continuous with your plantar fascia. Where your deep transverse metatarsal ligament does, or what its function is that it controls forefoot splay. So you could say that, you could look at it two ways. You could either say that your deep transverse metatarsal ligament restricts forefoot splay because splaying too much is bad. However, the way that I want you to think about it instead would be that when you shift forward into a push-off position, your foot is naturally going to splay. As your forefoot starts to splay, you start to pull and put tension on your deep transverse metatarsal ligament, which means now you're creating fascial tension, fascial stiffness for potential energy. You're then putting tension through your plantar plate. The tension of your plantar plate is going to stabilize your MPJs or your lever. It's going to go back proximally into the insertion of your plantar fascia to create tension through the arch and into the heel and invert your subtalar joint. So they're working in succession. Then when you actually pick your foot up and swing your leg forward, all of that fascial tension, including the tension of the deep transverse metatarsal ligament, is going to obviously be releasing elastic energy. That's the way that I look at it, and that's the way that I want you to look at it as well. If we looked at it the other way, that's where you could say, okay, shoes that restrict forefoot splay would be good because we have a deep transverse metatarsal ligament that restricts splay, so splay is bad, if that makes sense. I hope it is. So we know that we need splay. When we walk, when we do dynamic movement, we strike the ground and we get 1 to 1.5 times our body weight in impact forces. When we push off, your body actually releases 2 to 2.5 times your body weight. So your forefoot is actually designed to be taking a lot of that load. And part of that increase in load as you shift to your forefoot is, it's almost a necessary step to create sufficient stiffness in that lever. Again, just a natural part of the human foot and human bipedalism. So we're going to start talking about what's called the tie bar mechanism. And if you've never heard this, this is hopefully something new. And I love learning new things about the foot. And I honestly did not learn about tie bar in podiatry school. I don't know if there's any podiatrists listening, and if you learned about tie bar, but I did not. So I love doing these webinars and expanding my knowledge as well, because then that changes and expands the way that I'm able to help my patients, which I love. So we have what's called tie bar mechanism, and this is linked to your plantar fascia. You have 2 tie bars. You have a transverse tie bar and you have a longitudinal tie bar, and that tie bar is related to the fascial stiffness or the fascial tension that is happening through this plantar fascial web. So when we shift forward, I had mentioned that we have an average splay, which I think this is an interesting fact. So average forefoot splay when we shift forward is 3 millimeters for women, 5 millimeters for men. So if you're thinking about your shoes and you're assessing shoes of your clients or athletes, patients, some of the cleats that perhaps some of your athletes wear, you're going to want to make sure that they're allowing at least either 3 millimeters or 5 millimeters of splay. So what happens, and I had mentioned this when I was speaking about footwear, this is an x-ray that I took a month ago in my office, posted on Facebook, and it just kind of got shared like crazy. The picture on the left, I'm actually in a loafer. So it's a Coach loafer, zero drop, flexible shoe, and fits relatively well. It's a comfortable shoe. However, you can see what it's doing to my left foot. And what I'm doing in this x-ray is I'm shifted into a lever position. This is where we actually need forefoot splay. And then the picture on the right, I'm wearing my Vibrams. So you can see the difference in splay that's allowed. And what I want you to think about in addition to this is when you think about splay and forefoot splay, please do not just think about the digits. Yes, your digits need to splay, but even more so what needs to splay is your metatarsal heads. You need to be able to stimulate the deep transverse metatarsal ligament. That comes from metatarsal splay, not from digit splay. Digit splay is going to actually stimulate what's called the mooring ligament, which is still connected to the plantar fascia, but in a little bit different way. It's not as deeply connected to your lever and your plantar plate. Okay, so thinking about shoes, remember the 3 to 5 millimeters, men, women. And then when it comes to that tie bar mechanism, is shifting forward into this lever position and having that splay is essentially putting tension on your transverse tie bar, which increases and stabilizes your transverse arch. Your transverse tie bar is fascially connected through your plantar fascia to your longitudinal tie bar, which is your classic windlass mechanism. And it's just fascial tension. We speak about fascial tension a lot in EBFA's education. This is just another way that we can carry it throughout the foot. So, want to show you this as well. So we had said that your plantar fascia splits. It goes forward into the distal aspect of the foot, and then it divides into superficial and deep layers. This would be looking at your foot superficially. And this is going to hopefully help you appreciate neuromas and bursitis in the foot and how and why they're so difficult and there's so much frustration around treating them. Because look at how myofascially detailed the foot is. This is a plantar fascia right here that we can see coming forward. And then your plantar fascia actually has these little slips. These are collagen extensions that are directly connected to your plantar fascia that insert into the skin, which means that when you put tension through your plantar fascia, you are putting tension through the skin and the ball of the foot. And that's what's very unique and allows you to create a rigid lever for not just propulsion in a sagittal direction, but think about a lot of the movements that we do, different cutting movements or a dancer doing a pirouette. We're able to do a lot of things that have friction on the foot that if it were in a relaxed position, we would not be able to do. So skin tension or skin stiffness in the forefoot is also key to optimal human lever. The skin stiffness of your forefoot is linked to your plantar fascia. So having this deeply integrated relationship, again, is there for a reason, which means that this linking to the plantar fascia is going to link through the rest of your posterior chain. What's in between each of these, you can see kind of these gaps in between here. All of that would be filled with adipose tissue, and that's what gives you the fat pad on the ball of the foot. And then running through those fat pads or those adipose cells is your nerves, arteries, and veins. So this complexity also very, very important. So if you imagine, let's look at the foot real quick. Let's imagine that you had surgery on the foot. You made an incision through the plantar aspect of the foot. You're clearly going to be disrupting this natural complexity of a fascial network. And that's why scar tissue and incisions on the bottom of the foot are very difficult, or can be very difficult to deal with, because you're disrupting this natural anatomy, and everybody's scars a little bit different. So, had already mentioned this, windlass mechanism, tension on the skin, that allows us to do these amazing things with our foot. So if we take a closer look, this will be the last stuff that I focus on, is certain pathology and the fascial integration. So we cannot talk about the forefoot without talking about bunions. So sorry, go back there. Talking about bunions. So this is a bunion. This is an x-ray of a bunion. When anyone has a bunion, what I want you to think about is that client or that patient has lost their transverse tie bar mechanism. Because your transverse tie bar is connected to your longitudinal tie bar, they've lost both. So the function of your transverse tie bar is to stabilize the MPJs, or the lever for push-off. That's going to be disrupted, and we know that. We know that those who have bunions have a very unstable lever or push-off position. They often push off in what's called a low gear push-off versus a high gear. High gear push-off position, where you're directly over your MPJs and you're straight across all 5 metatarsal heads, that would be optimizing your tie bar mechanism. If you lose your transverse tie bar, you're going to influence your longitudinal tie bar, which means you're going to start to see a decrease in medial arch stability and rear foot inversion or supination, which of course we always see with bunions as well. So now we're just starting to make a more fascial integration based off of things that we already observe. We're just taking it from a slightly different perspective. Other thing that we want to think about is, if you see right here, we see these 2 bones. These are called your sesamoids. And your sesamoids actually run, or your plantar plate of your first MPJ, your plantar fascia extends into the plantar plate, which then surrounds these sesamoids. So when someone has a bunion of a certain severity, you start to see a shift in the sesamoid position. So that sesamoid position is telling you that they're losing that plantar plate centration. If we go forward, this is looking at a CT scan of the sesamoid position. And this helps you understand a little bit more of kind of the sequelae of a bunion and the arthritis and sesamoids and things like that. Sesamoids aren't spoken about a lot. I could definitely do a webinar on just sesamoid issues, which I might. So here, this is looking at your sesamoids. This is obviously anterior posterior position or view. We can see the sesamoids here. Do you see this ridge here? There's actually a cristae, or a groove, that they run in. And what happens when you start to get the bunion is that your sesamoids are going to start to shift lateral this way. So you can see that starting to shift. Now your medial sesamoid is running into that groove, and now you're going to start wearing out the cartilage that's there to create inflammation. The patient feels pain. They're starting to lose their tie bar mechanism, so now they have less tension in the foot. This picture here, your medial sesamoid is now in your lateral groove. Your lateral is not even in a groove, so they clearly have a shift in the plantar plate, plantar fascia alignment, which disrupts the tie bar mechanism, and that is going to again affect their lever, so the way that they release energy through the foot. Just wanted you to kind of see how that starts to affect that tie bar. Second one is neuromas. So we cannot speak about forefoot without talking about neuromas, and I have, for some reason, I get so many patients who have very complex neuromas, or they have stump neuromas, but the MRI is showing negative. Nothing is showing up as a stump neuroma, but they have all the symptoms, or they've had several MRIs and ultrasound, and nothing's really showing neuroma, but they have the classic symptoms of it. Very complex stuff. So, what a neuroma is, I'm going to show you first here. So, think of the neuroma as a scarred nerve. This is the easiest way that I explain it to patients, is if you irritate a nerve, or you kind of, you're like traumatizing it, injuring it in a sense, you create a scarring, inflammatory response. Sometimes you can have a irritated nerve that's just inflamed, and that's where you would do a steroid injection, and then the inflammation and the irritation goes down, and then the patient's fine. That's great. Sometimes you get more of a scarred nerve tissue response. Where the classic Morton's neuroma is if you see here, this is the bottom of the foot, it's always in that third inner space, and you can see that there's actually two nerves that are crossing. You have a lateral plantar nerve and a medial plantar nerve here, so it's a very unique position in the foot, and that's where you get a classic Morton's neuroma. Neuromas are not just in the third inner space. Here, this is an example of one in the second inner space. You can have one in the first, obviously any of them. Okay, few key things when it comes to neuromas, and it has to do with what we were talking about, and this complex fascial webbing that is linked to plantar fascia function and sufficient foot stiffness. That's the point of this whole thing. So right here, you have, let me go back one first, sorry. So you actually have 9 compartments in the foot. So you have these different compartments in the foot, and each compartment, just like our lower leg has compartments, every area of our body has compartments, and what they are is they are fascial compartments. So they're groups of muscles that are surrounded by the fascia. There's intermuscular or intercompartmental septae, or fascia, thicker fascia, sharper fascia, that divides these different compartments. So you have in the forefoot here, do you see right here? These are the septae, or the borders, the surroundings of the compartments in the foot. Okay? They are very sharp. And what's happening is that the digital nerves, the medial plantar nerve, lateral plantar nerve, divides into digital nerves, and those digital nerves actually have to hook around the septae, or these sharp fascial borders in the forefoot. Okay, so if you don't get the septae, or the sharp fascial border, out of the way, you can think of it like scratching or irritating the nerve, which obviously stimulates an injured response to the tissue, just like any other tissue in the body. Okay, so optimal foot function, optimal lever function, actually requires sufficient stiffness to the forefoot, meaning plantar fascia, plantar plate, deep transverse ligament, superficial transverse ligament. And when you tension that fascial web, your septae actually moves forward, distally, out of the way when you shift forward. If you do not get sufficient or quick or the appropriately timed fascial stiffness through your foot, the septae are not moved out of the way quick enough, and then that's where you get that sharp, the nerve hits that sharp fascial wall. That's what's leading to these neuromas. So let's talk about shoes. A lot of neuromas are blamed on shoes, stiff shoes, tight shoes, shoes that restrict forefoot splay. The purpose of forefoot splay is to be a key part of rapid, sufficient stiffness in your foot. So tensioning your foot as it splays 3 to 5 millimeters is going to help get the septae out of the way. So this is a little bit different way of looking at it than just saying, hey, you're pinching a nerve between your metatarsal heads and you hurt the nerve, which is really an overly simplistic way that a lot of podiatrists will look at neuromas. So we want to think of it much more as this fascial tension cascade. I hope that makes sense. If it doesn't, please let me know. All right, last thing I'm going to talk about, we're on our home stretch here. You guys are doing amazing, and I'm talking way too much. So hammer toes and forefoot lever. This goes back to the plantar plate. So if you remember the slide that I had in the beginning where there was the toe that was floating, that toe, I don't know if you could tell, but they actually had a Morton's toe. So that toe was longer. The second digit on that picture in the beginning was longer than the third, and they were contracted, they were lifted, they lost purchase. So I knew that they had a compromised plantar plate. They probably had a plantar plate tear. Here as well, remember the purpose of the plantar plate is to stabilize the MPJ and pull the toe down. This picture here, they also have a long second digit. They have bunion surgery, so that's probably why it's exaggerated here. It's probably not that long, but they had bunion surgery. So that's going to shorten the first. They have what's called a peace finger sign. So not only will the patient start to lose purchase, but they'll actually lose transverse plane stability of the MPJ. This is usually common in the second, and then that toe is going to start to drift over. Most tears in the plantar plate are lateral. And the way that I treat a majority of these in my patients is I do stem cell amniotic injections. And I've spoken about that a lot. I'm not going to go into that too much in this, but I will be doing a webinar, the one in January, with a web exercise where I'm going to be speaking about stem cells. So here you can just see the tear and the tear here as well. So hammer toes, when someone has a hammer toe, especially with a Morton's toe, and they compromise that plantar plate, they're essentially compromising the integrated fascial tension that I just spoke about, which obviously is going to compromise their overall foot function. So what can we do? Last two slides here. What can we do to optimize the human lever for our clients and patients? These are the key things. This is how I would keep your foot strong, how to avoid having any issues, any forefoot pathology, or if you're thinking an athlete that you want to have optimal function, your clients, yourself. Key thing is you obviously need to release your fascia. You do not want to just think large tennis ball roll, but Rad Roller, if you're not familiar with them, check them out, radroller.com. They have this small little black Rad Roller. It's called a Rad Round, and it can get into a lot of that tighter forefoot fascia, which I love. And it's a harder density, so you want to get in there and bring some of the hydration to that fascial tissue. So myofascial release, key. I tell my patients to release their feet 5 minutes in the morning, 5 minutes in the evening. That is the baseline. That should be part of their lifestyle. This is not just to get them out of pain. Other thing you want to look at is proper footwear. Make sure that the footwear allows forefoot splay. Again, thinking Vivo Barefoot, Vibram, something that's going to allow that 3 to 5 millimeter forefoot splay. You want the shoe to be minimal so that they're bringing in the proprioceptive input. The plantar fascia, this fascial web that I was speaking about, is obviously going to be very high in proprioceptors. The more cushion you put in shoes, the more you block the proprioceptive input from the ground. Third thing that we want to do is we want to keep our feet strong in a tension way. Short foot is the go-to exercise for establishing foot tension. Short foot in a single leg position is going to get even more fascial tension, and then that exercise can of course be blended into many other ones. Bottom video, or this YouTube link here, this is not only where we have all of our webinars, but there's a playlist called Run Injury Free, and this is where I have many different exercises. I designed it for my patients, but anyone can access it, and it has all of these short foot exercises that I recommend to my patients. And then the final thing that we want to do is the pre-activation training, because we can see that the fascial tension of our lever and that tie bar mechanism that we spoke about clearly has to be fast. And the slower you are at responding to the ground, the less sufficient stiffness you will have. That's where you start to get pathology. So not only do we need strong feet, but we need feet that can anticipate our movements, and we need very sharp neuromuscular coordination of our feet, obviously with the rest of our body. So if you guys have any questions, we'll go over those for a few minutes. As you guys are typing down your questions, just want to talk about two things. First thing is that we are having a master instructor camp. This is open to anyone who has attended our Barefoot Training Specialist Level 1. We do offer our Barefoot Training Specialist Level 1 online. The one that we are doing in New York is actually the 13th through the 15th, so please, I apologize that this is 12 to 15th. 13th through 15th in New York, and we have some amazing lineup. This is not going to be your ordinary Barefoot Training Specialist, Barefoot RX training. We're doing a cadaver lab, which is going to be amazing, going very into detail. Everything that I just said, we're going to be showing you in the cadaver lab. We're doing that at the New York College of Podiatric Medicine. We're doing a 4-hour public speaking in-service. We're learning about whole body vibration. We're doing some 3D kinematic surface EMG labs with the company Neuraxin. We're doing rad roller training. We're going to be doing some gyrotonics. So it's going to be incredible. We're also going to be doing a Naboso workout. If you're not familiar with Naboso, this is a product that EBFA just put out. Please check out nabosotechnology.com. It is the first, the only small nerve proprioceptive surface for doing barefoot movement. It is not just for yoga. It is for all different activities. We also have a flooring system as well. So check that out. Again, nabosotechnology.com. Please do not forget to download those articles, and if there is any questions, going to check those out right now. All right, so great question by Emily. Is recommending any minimal shoes for people with a short first toe, long second? So kind of a classic Morton's foot. This is one where I would actually say not to do Vibram. I would look more at Vivo Barefoot or New Balance Minimus has a decent last. Vibram, unfortunately, I wish that they had a more accommodating digit length and digit relationship with their shoes, but they do not. So I would look at Vivo Barefoot or New Balance Minimus. Also note that the natural last shape of the foot matches the parabola. So you actually want to have that rounded type appearance. It's not slanted. If you've ever seen some lasts that try to go, you know, like 1, 2, 3, 4, like slides down, that's not the natural shape of the foot. The second is the longest metatarsal on all of us. So I hope that helps, Emily. Another question, where's the Run Injury Free website located? Michael, if you go to youtube.com/EBFA Fitness, that goes to our full YouTube channel. And then there's a playlist that says Run Injury Free. Under there, you will find all of the exercises. Patient, I have multiple patients who swear by their orthotics due to deformities and flat feet. How do I convince them that wearing natural footwear sensory input is valuable? Some of them have been in orthotics for 15 years. So even though there are exceptions to every rule, and sometimes some people really should be in orthotics. So knowing that if they have navicular drop, that would be one where I would actually say, okay, dynamic movement, you might need to be in your orthotics. However, if you're not doing high impact, you could use different paddings and strappings. You could get some elastoplast and get a scaphoid pad and lift their navicular. So you're doing some sort of strapping to hold it up under their body weight when they're doing static or like squats and, you know, not high impact exercises. Then they don't need to be in their orthotics. The way that I typically transition or introduce barefoot training or foot stimulation to people who do use orthotics is I have them release their feet, 5 minutes, just roll their feet on a golf ball, tennis ball, rad roller, and then put their shoes back on. And so I'm just slowly starting to integrate it that way. And then when they start to get comfortable with that and kind of look forward to that, and they're almost, they have to do it on their own in a sense, then you can start to introduce, okay, release the feet, and then we're going to start doing short foot. Then put your shoes back on, right? So you can start to introduce a lot of the benefits of barefoot training and short foot, foot to core, while having this balance between the shoes and the orthotics with them. And then I would do an appropriate assessment to see if they actually need to be in them, because a lot of them probably don't, but some do. So another question from Martin, with a hammer toe, what kind of correlation is there, if there is one, if they have hip instability? So there may or may not be. You could say to some degree that there might be. There's a compromise distally and proximally, which the more breaks you have in stability, even microstability, accumulatively that's going to impact their movement. Can you say, because you've lost centration of your hip joint, you now have a tear in your plantar plate? I mean, everything is multifactorial. But I think seeing the correlation of, okay, if you lose hip centration, that creates a proximal instability. You're compromising your plantar plate, which is going to compromise your lever push-off and that stability, which means you're just adding the risk of accumulative stress on the body. So I would honestly address it more that way versus saying that caused that, because our body is so complex, and the stress that we introduce to our body is so different for each individual. Do you have a suggestion for a work boot for wide feet? I don't. However, I would go to Vivo Barefoot again, because they have work shoes, they have hiking shoes, they have their running shoes. I would go there, Mark, as your go-to website. And Michael, you're impressed with the talk of fascia as an osteopath. Oh, I know, me too. We need more people talking about this. Fascia is everywhere, and the fascial integration of the foot is completely fascinating. So, a couple more questions, and we'll be tying on. If you guys need to go, totally understand, but I'm going to try to blow through a few additional ones of these. So the question on the tie bar mechanism, that is, tie bar mechanism, again, just to review, is deep transverse metatarsal ligament blending into the plantar plate, blending into the plantar fascia. That would be your tie bar mechanism. And then that would be able to do both the windlass and the reverse windlass mechanism. So all of those, you could almost say that they're almost like synonymous. Okay. See, with bunions, is it possible to reverse the severity of a bunion? So my go-to for bunions, especially if they're mild, but I'll recommend it to all my patients, is a bunion booty. Check out Bunion Booty, BOOTIE.com, and it'll stretch your adductor hallucis and try to balance out that joint a little bit more. A lot of bunions, unfortunately, cannot be reversed without surgery because they start to shift into becoming a structural imbalance. So if somebody actually has a moderate bunion and they say that they cured it or reversed it without surgery and by doing exercises, that's hooey. It's just impossible. Once you break the metcuneiform joint and you have a certain degree of laxity, you can't. However, by using a bunion booty, by doing short foot, by trying to maintain as much balance as you can, if you can push pause on the progression of the bunion, that's a good thing. And that's what we're going after, is pushing pause, having the reality that you're not going to reverse it, still a positive in my opinion. Oh, okay, so Eric has a question on a patient who complains of the toes curling or contracting when they swing through swing phase. That's actually what's called an extensor dominance hammer toe. That's an extensor dominance. I would check that out. We talk about that in our BTS level 1 and our Barefoot RX level 1 certification, but that's what it is. So their extensor muscles are dominating the tibialis anterior and they're pulling the digits up when they go through swing phase. That's often associated with what's called an anterior cavus foot. So sometimes it's foot type driven. Again, we go into that more detail in our workshops, and it's, or you could start reading and researching a little bit on extensor dominance hammer toes. Is a bunionette, this will be my last question because you guys have so many amazing questions, but there's only so much time. Okay, last question on a bunionette. Great question. So a Taylor's bunion or a bunionette is also a break in the tie bar mechanism. When someone loses their tie bar mechanism, their transverse stability, the first goes one way, the fifth goes the other. So if someone has a bunion, they would lose their transverse tie bar, but even if someone has just a Taylor's bunion, they too are losing their transverse tie bar. However, the first to second relationship, that tie bar, is more important or more influential because it connects to the medial band of your plantar fascia, which is the band that's connected to the windlass mechanism and the arch. Whereas a bunionette with the fifth, your lateral plantar fascial band is less important than the medial and the central. So it's going to have less impact on overall foot function than a bunion. I hope that helps you guys. So you guys have been amazing. Thank you so much for your questions. Please do stay tuned for any of our future webinars that we're going to be doing. Please do check out this amazing MI camp. It is limited to a certain number of people. Hoping around 35 if we can get the space over at the cadaver lab, and more of that is found on EBFAfitness.com. Again, everything is recorded. Check it out. Any questions? If you want this PowerPoint, forgot to mention that, so sorry when people clicked off. If you want this PowerPoint, email me at education@ebfafitness.com, education@ebfafitness.com, and I will send you the PDF from tonight. Download those articles. Hope you guys are well, and I will see you soon. Stay barefoot strong.